My parents sold me to an orphanage along with my brother, and with the money they earned, they went to have fun. I was 14 when I learned betrayal can come from the people you love most. Until then, my life had been far from perfect, but it was familiar, routine. I shared a cramped house with my parents and my older brother, Alex. We weren't rich, but I thought we were doing okay. We always had food on the table, and Mom and Dad worked hard, or so I believed. It all unraveled one crisp autumn evening. Mom called Alex and me into the living room. She had that forced, brittle smile she always wore when delivering bad news, like the time she accidentally gave away my favorite doll during spring cleaning. "Kids, we need to have a talk," she began. Dad sat stiffly next to her, avoiding eye contact. Alex, 17 at the time, leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed and jaw tight. He had a sixth sense for trouble, and I could see the tension building in his shoulders. I perched on the couch, nervous but clueless. "We've been struggling financially," Mom continued. "It's been hard for us to keep up. After a lot of thought, we've decided it's best for you two to stay with a foster family for a while." Foster family? My stomach dropped. At first, I thought I misunderstood. Foster care was something that happened to other kids with no parents or parents who couldn't take care of them. Not us. I glanced at Alex, whose face darkened with anger. "Are you serious?" he snapped. "You're just dumping us?" "It's not like that," Dad said, finally looking up. His voice cracked under the weight of his lie. "This is temporary. We'll get back on our feet and you'll come home." I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg them to reconsider, but my voice caught in my throat. Alex, however, had no such hesitation. "Back on your feet? What does that even mean?" "You're just giving up on us," he shouted. "We don't have a choice," Mom said, her tone sharper now. "You'll be better off this way." Better off? How could losing our family ever be better? 2 weeks later, a social worker named Karen arrived to take us away. I didn't even know our parents had been arranging this behind our backs. Karen was kind in that overly sympathetic way adults are when they think you're too fragile to handle the truth. She tried to make small talk as we loaded our few belongings into her car, but Alex ignored her, his anger simmering just below the surface. I sat silently, staring out the window as our house disappeared behind us. We ended up in a group home at first, a crowded, noisy place with peeling paint and mismatched furniture. The other kids were a mix of sullen and aggressive, each carrying their own baggage. Alex stayed glued to my side, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. He didn't trust anyone, and honestly, neither did I. Days turned into weeks, and I kept waiting for a sign that Mom and Dad missed us, that they were working to bring us home. But the phone calls were infrequent and strained, filled with empty reassurances that felt more like rehearsed lines than genuine emotion. The truth came out almost by accident. One of the group home staff members, a kind older woman named Linda, was chatting with me one day. She mentioned how hard it must be for my parents to send us away, and I nodded along, too tired to argue. "They're probably doing everything they can to make ends meet," she said. "It must be tough with the economy being what it is." Something about her words struck a nerve. My parents had always been secretive about money, but we'd never been on the brink of homelessness. I decided to investigate. A few days later, while Linda was out, I used the office phone to call an old neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. She was a nosy retiree who knew everyone's business, and I figured if anyone had information, it would be her. "Claire, how are you, sweetheart?" She greeted me warmly. I hesitated before diving in. "Mrs. Peterson, have you seen my parents lately? I missed them, and I want to know how they're doing." There was a long pause, then she said, "Oh, I didn't realize they hadn't told you." "Told me what?" My heart raced. "Well, they've been out of town a lot. I thought maybe they were on some sort of extended vacation." "Vacation?" My voice cracked. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Peterson hesitated again, clearly unsure if she should say more. "I saw them loading up their car a few weeks ago with suitcases. I asked where they were off to, and your mother mentioned a resort in Mexico." The world seemed to tilt. Mexico? While Alex and I were crammed into a group home, our parents were sipping margaritas on a beach. That night, I told Alex everything. He was furious, pacing the tiny room we shared, his hands clenched into fists. "They didn't even try to hide it," he muttered. "They just dumped us and ran." We decided to confront them. Alex used a payphone to call Dad, keeping his tone deceptively calm. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to check in. How's the financial situation?" he asked. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to confirm our suspicions. "It's better," Dad said awkwardly. "We're working on things." "Working on things?" Alex snapped. You mean lounging at a resort while we're stuck in foster care? Dad tried to deny it, but Alex wouldn't let up. Eventually, he hung up, seething. That was the moment I realized we were truly on our own. Our parents weren't coming back for us, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. The betrayal hurt deeply, but it also lit a fire in me. I refused to let their abandonment define me. With Alex's support, I began focusing on school, pouring all my energy into creating a future for myself. Alex, always protective, started working odd jobs, determined to save enough money for us to get out of the system. Though the pain of our parents' actions never fully faded, it taught us an invaluable lesson. Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. When Alex and I were placed with the Greens, I didn't know what to expect. By then, I had spent nearly 6 months in the group home, and my trust in adults had been thoroughly eroded. Everyone I encountered seemed either disinterested or burdened by my presence, and I had no reason to believe this would be any different. The Greens were unlike anyone I had met before. Janet and Tom Green, both in their mid-40s, welcomed us into their home with a warmth that felt almost suspicious. They lived in a modest but charming house with a wraparound porch and a yard filled with wildflowers. Janet was a teacher at the local middle school, and Tom ran a small landscaping business. They had 2 children of their own, Emily, who was 11, and Ryan, who was 9. Both kids were polite but curious, their wide eyes fixed on Alex and me as if we were exotic creatures. From the moment we arrived, Janet made it clear she wasn't like the other foster parents we had encountered. She didn't treat us as burdens or strangers. She treated us like family. On our first night, she cooked a massive dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm apple pie for dessert. It was the kind of meal I hadn't had in years, and I found myself tearing up halfway through it. "You're safe here," Janet said softly as she noticed my expression. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me held back, waiting for the inevitable disappointment. Alex, ever the skeptic, remained aloof, responding to kindness with silence or curt nods. He didn't trust anyone, and I couldn't blame him. But something about the Greens felt different, and over time, I began to let my guard down. School became my sanctuary. Janet enrolled me in Oak Ridge High, a school with a reputation for its competitive academic and extracurricular programs. I was determined to throw myself into my studies, not just to prove I was capable, but to escape the crushing weight of my past. I joined every club I could find: debate, drama, yearbook committee, and even the robotics team, despite having no prior experience. I stayed late at school nearly every day, attending rehearsals, meetings, and study groups. It wasn't just about keeping busy. It was about building a new identity, one that wasn't defined by abandonment and betrayal. The Greens supported me every step of the way. Janet would stay up late helping me rehearse my lines for the school play or edit my essays for English class. Tom built a makeshift desk for me in the corner of the guest room, complete with shelves for my growing stack of books and binders. Even Emily and Ryan got involved, cheering me on at debate tournaments and school events. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The ghosts of my past had a way of resurfacing when I least expected it. One afternoon, while I was sorting through my old belongings, I found a crumpled photo of my parents and me, taken during a rare family outing to the beach. I stared at their smiling faces, a mixture of rage and longing twisting in my chest. How could they have abandoned us so easily? How could they move on without a second thought while I was left to piece my life back together? I thought about calling them, confronting them, demanding answers. But what would be the point? They had made their choice, and I needed to make mine. I tore the photo in half and shoved it into the trash. A few months into our stay with the Greens, Alex dropped a bombshell. He had been offered a full-time job at a construction company in a neighboring town and planned to move out. He sat me down in the living room, his expression unreadable. "Claire, you don't need me here anymore," he said. "You're doing great on your own. I'm proud of you." I was stunned. Alex had always been my rock, the one constant in my chaotic life. The thought of him leaving felt like losing a limb. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What if I need you?" "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And besides, the Greens are good people. You'll be fine." I didn't argue. I knew he was right, even if it hurt to admit it. The night he left, Janet found me crying in the guest room. She sat down beside me, wrapping me in a tight hug. "You're not alone, Claire," she said. "We're here for you." Her words were comforting, but the loss of Alex left a void that took months to fill. I threw myself even deeper into school activities, earning a reputation as the overachiever who was involved in everything. Teachers and classmates started to notice me, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. One of the most shocking moments during my time with the Greens happened during a robotics competition. Our team, led by a brilliant but eccentric senior named Tyler, had been working on a robot designed to navigate a maze autonomously. The competition was fierce, with teams from all over the state vying for the top prize. Just as our robot was about to complete the maze, it malfunctioned, veering off course and crashing into a wall. Tyler was devastated, but I saw an opportunity. I suggested a last-minute tweak to the code, something I had picked up during late-night study sessions. Against all odds, the fix worked, and our robot completed the maze with seconds to spare. We ended up winning second place, and for the first time, I felt like I had truly contributed to something bigger than myself. But the high didn't last long. A few weeks later, I received a letter from my parents. It was brief and impersonal, filled with vague platitudes about how they hoped I was doing well. There was no mention of regret or apology, no acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. I shredded the letter without reading it twice. Despite the setbacks, my life with the Greens continued to improve. Janet and Tom treated me like their own daughter, and Emily and Ryan became the siblings I never knew I needed. By the time my junior year rolled around, I had a 4.0 GPA, a trophy case full of awards, and a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. It was during my senior year of high school when the truth about my parents finally came to light. By then, I had almost grown used to their absence, tucking away the memories of their betrayal into a corner of my mind I rarely visited. Life with the Greens had given me stability, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my future. But the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. It started with a call from my mom. Hearing her voice after so long sent a jolt through me. I had stopped expecting anything from her, but a part of me still longed for answers, for some shred of remorse. "Claire, sweetie, how are you?" she said, her tone light and casual, as if we hadn't been estranged for years. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice tight. "What's going on?" "I was just thinking about you," she said. "It's been so long, and I wanted to check in. How's school?" The small talk grated on my nerves. After everything she had done, she wanted to act like nothing had happened? Still, I played along, giving her short, polite answers. The conversation turned bizarre when she started talking about her recent trips. She mentioned visiting the Bahamas, cruising through Europe, and spending a month in Hawaii. Her words flowed with a kind of careless excitement that made my stomach churn. "How did you afford all that?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion out of my voice. "Oh, we've been saving for years," she said breezily. "Your father and I decided it was finally time to enjoy ourselves." I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Saving for years? They couldn't afford to keep their own children, but they had been saving for vacations? It didn't make sense. "Mom, are you serious?" I said, my voice rising. "You abandoned Alex and me because you said you couldn't afford us, and now you're telling me you've been traveling the world?" Her tone shifted immediately, defensive and sharp. "Claire, don't start. You don't understand how hard it was for us." "Hard for you?" I snapped. "You left us in foster care and spent all your money on vacations. How is that supposed to make sense?" She didn't answer, and the silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but instead, she deflected. "You have no idea what we went through, Claire. We sacrificed everything for you and Alex, and this is the thanks we get? You're so ungrateful." The word hit me like a slap. Ungrateful? I had spent years scraping by, trying to rebuild my life while they lived it up without a care in the world. My anger boiled over. "Ungrateful? You don't get to call me that," I said, my voice shaking. "You abandoned your own kids. You don't get to play the victim." She hung up on me, and I stared at the phone in disbelief. I had always known my parents were selfish, but this was a new low. Determined to get the full story, I decided to investigate further. I called Alex, who was now living on his own and working full-time. He had always been more practical than emotional, but even he was furious when I told him about the conversation. "They've been lying to us this whole time," he said. "I'm not surprised, but it still pisses me off." We decided to confront them together. Alex drove me to their house, a modest but well-kept home that looked far better than the one we had grown up in. When Mom opened the door, her face fell. She didn't seem happy to see us. "What are you two doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms. "We need to talk," Alex said firmly. Inside, reluctantly, she let us in. Dad was sitting on the couch, watching TV, and barely glanced at us as we entered. The tension in the room was palpable. "Why don't you tell us the truth?" Alex said, cutting straight to the point. You said you couldn't afford to take care of us, but you've been spending all your money on vacations and a new house. What's going on? Dad finally looked up, his expression annoyed. We don't owe you an explanation, he said. You're adults now. You're fine. You don't owe us an explanation? I repeated, my voice rising. You abandoned us. Do you even care what that did to us? Mom rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Claire. Stop being so dramatic. You've had a good life. Look at you now. You're doing great. We did what we had to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were completely unapologetic, refusing to acknowledge the damage they had caused. My hands shook as I tried to keep my composure. You didn't do what you had to do, I said. You did what you wanted to do. You chose yourselves over your own kids. That's not love. That's selfishness. Dad stood up, his face red. You don't get to talk to us like that, he said. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? You're spoiled and ungrateful. Alex stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. We're done with this, he said. You're not parents. You're just two people who gave up when things got hard. Don't expect us to come back. Without another word, we walked out. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness, knowing this was the end of any relationship I could have hoped for with them. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I couldn't keep hoping for something that would never come. That night, back at the Greens' house, I cried in Janet's arms. She didn't say much, just held me and let me feel the weight of it all. I realized then that cutting ties with my parents wasn't just an act of anger, it was an act of self-preservation. They had chosen themselves, and now, I had to choose me. From that day forward, I focused on the people who had been there for me. The Greens, my friends, and Alex. My parents became a distant memory, a painful lesson in what love should never be. When I received the email about the $120,000 grant, I almost didn't believe it. It felt like a cruel joke, something too good to be true. The subject line read, "Congratulations. You've been selected for the Future Leaders Fellowship," and my hands shook as I clicked it open. I read the words over and over again, letting them sink in. It was real. I had won a grant to attend one of the most prestigious universities in the country. The grant was the result of months of hard work. In my final year of high school, I had poured myself into every scholarship application I could find, crafting essays about resilience, ambition, and the importance of education. It was Janet who had encouraged me to apply for the Future Leaders Fellowship, even though I thought I didn't stand a chance. You have a story that deserves to be heard, she had said, her voice firm. And you've earned this, Claire. She was right, but self-doubt lingered. Winning the grant wasn't just about money. It was validation, proof that my struggles had been worth something. But the victory was bittersweet. I couldn't help but think about Alex, who had given up his own dreams to make sure I had a shot at mine. He had been my rock, and now, I was about to leave him behind. When I told Alex the news, he hugged me tightly. You deserve this, he said. Don't hold back. With his blessing, I packed my bags and headed to university. The campus was a world away from anything I had ever known. Grand buildings, sprawling green lawns, and students who seemed to have it all together. I felt out of place at first, like an imposter in someone else's story. But I reminded myself why I was there. I had worked for this. I belonged. The first semester was overwhelming. I juggled a full course load, part-time jobs, and an internship at a local nonprofit. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight, but I didn't complain. I had been through worse, and I knew this was my chance to build something better. It was during one of my shifts at the campus cafe that I met Rachel, a fellow student who would become one of my closest friends. She was a business major with a sharp wit and an entrepreneurial spirit that matched my own. We bonded over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of creating something meaningful. One night, as we sat in the library, Rachel turned to me with an idea. We could start a consulting business, she said. There are so many students struggling with resumes, interview prep, and networking. We could help them and make some money in the process. The idea intrigued me. I had always been good at organizing and problem-solving, and Rachel's enthusiasm was contagious. We started small, offering workshops and one-on-one sessions for a modest fee. Word spread quickly, and soon, we were swamped with clients. Balancing the business with school and work was a challenge, but it was exhilarating. Rachel and I worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines and brainstorm new services. We faced our fair share of setbacks, clients who canceled at the last minute, software glitches, and moments of self-doubt. But we pushed through, driven by a shared determination to succeed. The business grew faster than we had anticipated. By the end of our sophomore year, We had expanded our services to include career coaching and personal branding. We even hired a few part-time employees to help manage the workload. The income wasn't enough to make us rich, but it was more than I had ever imagined earning as a student. I saved every penny I could, determined to build a safety net for the future. But it wasn't just the business that shaped me during those years. I learned to navigate a world I had once felt excluded from, building connections and seizing opportunities one never thought possible. I attended networking events, joined professional organizations, and sought out mentors who could guide me. One of those mentors was Professor Daniels, a brilliant but intimidating economics professor who saw potential in me from the start. "Claire," he said during one of our meetings, "you have the drive and intelligence to make a real impact. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words stayed with me, especially during the tough times. When the stress of juggling so many responsibilities threatened to overwhelm me, I reminded myself of what I was working toward. I wasn't just building a career, I was building a life. The most challenging moment came during my junior year. Rachel and I had landed a major client, a local tech startup, looking for help with their recruitment strategy. It was our biggest project yet, and the pressure was immense. For weeks, we worked around the clock, conducting research, drafting proposals, and fine-tuning our pitch. The day of the presentation, everything that could go wrong did. Our laptop crashed an hour before the meeting, and we had to scramble to recreate our slides. Traffic delayed us, and we arrived at the client's office with minutes to spare. As I stood in front of the room, my heart pounding, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of how far I had come. The presentation was a success. The startup signed a 6-month contract with us, and their positive feedback boosted our credibility. It was a turning point for the business, and for me. I realized then that I was capable of handling whatever challenges came my way. By the time I graduated, I had saved enough money to feel secure for the first time in my life. The consulting business had become a steady source of income, and I had built a network of mentors and supporters who believed in me. The $120,000 grant had opened doors I never thought possible, but it was my own hard work and determination that had carried me through. I should have known that my parents would eventually find their way back into my life, not out of love or remorse, but out of desperation. I hadn't heard from them in years. After I graduated and began building my career, they became nothing more than a painful memory, a ghost of the betrayal that had shaped me. But ghosts have a way of haunting you when you least expect it. It started with a voicemail. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, even though I hadn't heard it in so long. "Claire, it's your mother. I know it's been a while, but we need to talk. It's urgent. Please call me back." I stared at my phone, torn between deleting the message and calling her to demand what she wanted. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I dialed the number, and she picked up on the first ring. "Claire." "Oh, thank God you called," she said, her tone overly sweet, the same one she used whenever she wanted something. "We've been trying to reach you. What do you want?" I asked bluntly, skipping the pleasantries. There was a pause, and then her voice shifted, trembling with what I assumed was feigned vulnerability. "We're in trouble, Claire. Your father's business, it's gone under. We've lost everything." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure how to feel. Sympathy? No, they had burned that bridge long ago. Satisfaction? Maybe a little, but mostly, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though my tone was anything but genuine. "But what does this have to do with me?" Her voice hardened. "Claire, we're your parents. You have a responsibility to help us." That word, responsibility, sent a wave of anger through me. They hadn't felt responsible for me when they left me in foster care, when they spent years traveling and living it up while I struggled to rebuild my life. Now, they wanted my help? "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "You made your choices. You left me and Alex to fend for ourselves. Don't call me again." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline. I hoped that would be the end of it, but deep down, I knew better. Over the next few weeks, the calls and messages escalated. My father left a particularly nasty voicemail, accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish. "We raised you," he shouted into the phone. "The least you can do is help us when we're in need." I ignored them, hoping they would give up, but instead, they grew more desperate. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was hand-delivered, which meant they had gone out of their way to find my address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a scrawled message from my mother. "If you don't help us, we'll go public with everything. You know what we're talking about." I read the note over and over, trying to decipher the meaning. What could they possibly have on me? My life was an open book. They had no secrets to hold over me, at least none that were true. Still, the idea that they would stoop to blackmail didn't surprise me. I called Alex that evening, furious and frustrated. He listened quietly as I vented, his voice calm and measured when he finally spoke. "They're desperate," he said. "They'll say or do anything to scare you. Don't let them get to you." Easier said than done. The next blow came a week later when I received a letter from a lawyer representing my parents. They were threatening to sue me for financial neglect, claiming I had a legal obligation to support them. I laughed when I first read it. It was so absurd, so far-fetched. But the laughter quickly gave way to anxiety. What if they actually went through with it? What if they found a way to drag me into court and ruin everything I had worked for? I called my own lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Eleanor, who had been recommended to me by a friend. She reviewed the letter, shaking her head as she read it. "This is complete nonsense," she said. "They don't have a leg to stand on. They're trying to scare you into giving them money. Can they sue me anyway?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "Anyone can file a lawsuit," Eleanor said, "but it won't go anywhere. If they try, we'll fight it, and I can guarantee you'll win. In fact, if they keep harassing you, we can file a restraining order." Her confidence was reassuring, but the stress of the situation weighed heavily on me. I didn't want a legal battle. I wanted them out of my life for good. The final straw came when they showed up at my office. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant, Megan, knocked on the door, her expression uneasy. "There's a couple here to see you," she said. "They say they're your parents." I felt my stomach drop. "Tell them I'm not available." Megan hesitated. "They're making a scene in the lobby." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "I'll handle it." When I walked into the lobby, I saw them standing by the front desk, arguing with the receptionist. My mother's face lit up when she saw me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice low and steady. "We need to talk," my father said, his tone somewhere between pleading and demanding. "We've tried calling, writing, everything," my mother added. "You left us no choice." "This is not the place," I said, glancing around at the onlookers. "You need to leave." "Not until you agree to help us," my father said, his voice rising. "You owe us, Claire. We're your family." "Family," I said, my voice sharp. "You abandoned me. You have no right to demand anything from me." They didn't back down, and the confrontation grew heated. Eventually, security had to escort them out, but the damage was done. The whispers and stares from my colleagues were humiliating, and I spent the rest of the day trying to shake off the encounter. That evening, I called Eleanor again, relaying what had happened. She was furious on my behalf. "This is harassment," she said. "We're filing for a restraining order." Enough is enough. The legal process was draining, but it worked. The restraining order barred my parents from contacting me or coming near my home or workplace. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. They had pushed and manipulated me, but I had stood my ground. The call from Alex came on a quiet Saturday morning, just as I was sipping coffee and going over some notes for a client project. I hadn't heard from him in a few weeks, which wasn't unusual. He was busy with work, and I was busy with life, but we always made time to check in. Still, when I saw his name flash on my screen, a part of me braced for bad news. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but serious. "I'm leaving the boarding school." I nearly dropped my mug. Alex had spent the last 5 years at a boarding school for troubled youth, a place he had chosen after years of drifting and struggling to find his footing. It wasn't an easy decision for him, and the experience had been far from smooth. Still, I knew it had given him structure and stability, something we both craved after our chaotic upbringing. "You're leaving?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Why now?" "I've done what I needed to do there," he said. "It's time for me to move on. I want to be closer to you." The words hit me like a wave of warmth. For so long, Alex had been my protector, my anchor, the one person I could count on no matter what. The thought of him moving closer, of having him nearby again, filled me with a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I was missing. "When are you coming?" I asked, my voice softening. "End of the month," he said. "I've already got a place lined up, just a few miles from you." True to his word, Alex arrived 2 weeks later with nothing but a few suitcases and a determination to start fresh. I helped him move into his new apartment, a small but cozy one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. "It's weird being out," he admitted as we unpacked boxes in his kitchen. "I got so used to the routine at the school, the rules, the schedules. But this feels right. I nodded, understanding more than he realized. You're free now, I said. You can build whatever life you want. And that's exactly what he did. Over the next few months, Alex threw himself into his new life. He found a job at a local repair shop, using the mechanical skills he had honed at the boarding school to fix cars and motorcycles. He made friends with his coworkers, started going to the gym regularly, and even joined a local pool league. Seeing him thrive filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. But as much as Alex was rebuilding his life, he also became an even bigger part of mine. We had always been close, but having him nearby strengthened our bond in ways I hadn't expected. He would stop by my apartment unannounced, bringing takeout or just hanging out while I worked. On weekends, we'd go hiking or explore local farmers markets, laughing and catching up like no time had passed. It wasn't just Alex who was becoming more integrated into my life. The Greens had always been my second family, but as I approached my 22nd birthday, our relationship took on a new depth. Janet and Tom had supported me through everything: school, my career, the chaos with my parents, and their love never wavered. They were the ones who had shown me what family could be, what it should be, and I couldn't imagine my life without them. A few weeks before my birthday, Janet invited me over for dinner. I didn't think much of it at first. Family dinners with the Greens were a regular occurrence. But when I arrived, there was an energy in the air that felt different. Emily and Ryan, now teenagers, greeted me with conspiratorial smiles, and Tom seemed unusually nervous. "What's going on?" I asked as we sat down to eat. Janet exchanged a glance with Tom, and then she turned to me, her eyes shining with emotion. "Claire," she began, her voice steady but thick with feeling. "You've been a part of our family for so long, but we've been talking, and, well, we want to make it official. We want to adopt you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. Adoption? At 22? It was something I had never even considered, but as Janet spoke, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't contain. "You've always been like a daughter to us," she continued, "and we want you to know that this isn't just about paperwork. It's about letting the world know what we already feel in our hearts. Your family, Claire. You always have been." Tears streamed down my face as I tried to find the words to respond. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "You've already given me so much. I don't deserve this." Tom reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "You deserve everything, Claire, and we want to give this to you if you'll let us." I nodded, unable to speak, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt since I was a child. They wanted me, not because they had to, but because they chose to. For someone who had spent so much of her life feeling abandoned and unwanted, it was a feeling I could hardly comprehend. The adoption process was surprisingly straightforward. Since I was an adult, there were fewer legal hoops to jump through, and within a few months, it was official. I was Claire Green, legally and emotionally part of the family that had saved me. The day the papers were finalized, Janet and Tom threw a small celebration at their house. Alex was there, along with Emily, Ryan, and a few close friends. We laughed, ate cake, and toasted to new beginnings. Looking around the room that night, I realized just how far I had come. The family I was born into had let me down in every way, but the family I chose, the Greens, Alex, and the people who had stood by me, had given me everything I needed to heal and thrive. Alex pulled me aside at one point, a mischievous grin on his face. "You know, I think this makes me an honorary Green too," he said. I laughed, shaking my head. "You've always been family, Alex. You don't need paperwork for that." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "I'm proud of you, Claire, for everything. You've built something amazing." "So have you," I said. "We both have." That night, as I sat with the Greens and Alex, surrounded by laughter and love, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The past still lingered in the background, but it no longer defined me. I had chosen my path, my family, and my future, and for the first time, I felt truly whole. Walking across the stage at graduation felt surreal. As I adjusted my cap and shook the dean's hand, the applause from the crowd seemed to fade into the background. It wasn't the ceremony that mattered. It was the culmination of everything I had worked so hard for. Graduating with honors wasn't just a title. It was proof that I had defied every expectation, every statistic that said kids like me didn't make it this far. My family, Janet, Tom, Alex, Emily, and Ryan, were in the audience, cheering louder than anyone else. When the ceremony ended, they rushed to meet me, arms open and faces beaming with pride. Janet hugged me first, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Claire," she said. "I always knew you would." Alex smirked, ruffling my hair like he used to when we were kids. "You're officially the smart one in the family now." I laughed, swatting his hand away. It was a perfect moment, one I wished I could freeze forever. Graduation wasn't the end of my journey, though. It was just the beginning. With my degree in hand, I started working at a nonprofit focused on financial literacy education. The organization's mission resonated deeply with me. Growing up, money had been a constant source of stress and instability, and I wanted to help others avoid the same struggles. My first project was to design workshops for foster youth transitioning into adulthood. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. I spent hours researching, creating materials, and collaborating with colleagues to develop programs that were practical and engaging. Seeing the impact firsthand, watching young adults learn how to budget, save, and plan for their futures was a feeling unlike any other. But even as I poured myself into my career, I had another goal in mind: buying my first home. It felt like an impossible dream at first. A $450,000 house was no small feat, especially for someone who had grown up with nothing. But I was determined. I worked multiple side gigs, consulting for small businesses and freelancing as a financial coach. Every extra dollar went into my savings account, inching me closer to my goal. After 2 years of saving and meticulous planning, I found the perfect house, a charming 3-bedroom with a wraparound porch and a backyard filled with oak trees. When I signed the papers and held the keys in my hand, I felt a rush of emotions. This wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had overcome. Alex helped me move in, his voice full of mock complaints as we carried furniture up the narrow staircase. "I hope you know this means I get dibs on the guest room," he said, setting down a box labeled books. "Only if you bring your own snacks," I shot back, grinning. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. I threw myself into my work, and as the programs I developed gained traction, I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events. My focus wasn't just on financial literacy, but also on advocating for foster care reform. I shared my story openly, hoping to inspire change and give others the tools to succeed. It wasn't long before the recognition started coming in. I received my first award, a Rising Star accolade from a national nonprofit association, at a glittering gala in downtown Chicago. As I stepped onto the stage to accept the plaque, I felt a surge of pride and disbelief. People in the audience, people I admired, were standing and clapping for me. Me, a foster kid who had once thought she wouldn't amount to anything. One award led to another, and soon I was featured in articles and interviews, sharing insights about my work. But through it all, I remained grounded, always reminding myself of why I started. My experiences had shaped me, and I never wanted to lose sight of that. In the midst of all this, love found its way into my life. I met Daniel at a financial literacy summit in San Francisco. He was a software engineer with a quiet charm and a knack for solving problems in the most creative ways. We were paired together for a panel discussion, and from the moment we started talking, it felt like we had known each other forever. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values. Daniel wasn't just supportive. He actively encouraged me to dream bigger. When I told him about my plans to expand my advocacy work, he offered to help design a website to reach more people. "You have something important to share," he said one evening as we worked late into the night. "Let's make sure the world hears it." 2 years after we met, Daniel proposed during a quiet evening at home. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate plan. Just the two of us sitting on the couch, talking about our dreams for the future. He pulled out a ring and said, "I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaky with emotion. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the Greens' backyard. Janet and Tom walked me down the aisle, their faces glowing with pride, while Alex stood by my side as my man of honor. The vows Daniel and I exchanged were simple but heartfelt, a promise to support and cherish each other through whatever life brought. As I looked around at the people who had shaped my life, the Greens, Alex, my friends and colleagues, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. These were the people who had believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. My work continued to thrive after the wedding. Daniel and I collaborated on a project to develop an app for foster youth, providing them with resources and tools to navigate life's challenges. The app gained national attention, and we were invited to present it at a technology summit in New York. Seeing the impact it had on young people was one of the proudest moments of my life. By the time I turned 30, I had achieved more than I ever thought possible. My career was flourishing, my home was filled with love and laughter, and my advocacy work had touched countless lives. But the most important achievement wasn't something that could be measured in awards or accolades. It was the knowledge that I had built a life on my own terms, surrounded by the family I had chosen.